6-point lead in a two-way race and just under a 5-point lead in a four-way. The betting odds, meanwhile, continue to show her a favorite by more than 5-1. Meanwhile, there is a new Fox News electoral map out tonight, and Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry reports.
Britt, no Republican has won the White House without carrying Florida since Calvin Coolidge in 1924. That's why both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were there today, and why this dramatic move in the Fox News electoral scorecard tonight suggests this race could be swinging in the Democrats' direction. Look at the map tonight. Florida had been a toss-up state. We are now putting it in the lean Democrat column. Important because it's the biggest battleground state of them all. A mother lode you see there of 29 electoral votes. We're seeing a shift in the polling in the wake of that controversial Trump tape, but also the Clinton camp is doing a better job on the ground registering new voters. Now check out Nevada out west. All eyes turn there next week, of course, when our own Chris Wallace will moderate the third and final presidential debate. We're also moving it from toss-up to lean Democrat. The polls moving in Clinton's direction as well, but also the Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid has a formidable machine to help get out the vote, while this is one of many states where there's questions looming about Trump's ground game. In a close race, Nevada's 6 electoral votes could be critical, but the bottom line is that tonight, as we digest these new numbers, this does not seem like such a tight battle. We have Trump now, you can see up here, at 187 electoral votes, 44 electoral votes still up for grabs, but that doesn't get him to 270, the magic number to win, and Clinton well over 270 at 307. Meanwhile, Ohio still listed as a toss-up. The Buckeye State had been trending Trump, now seems to be back to a dead heat. We're going to be watching Ohio very closely the next time we update this scorecard to see where that's heading. Britt?
Okay, Ed, thank you very much. There is one new poll out today that, while continuing to show a significant lead for Clinton, nonetheless suggests that Donald Trump had gained at least some ground from the debate on Sunday night. As you can see there, it's a 9-point lead there nationally, down from an 11-point lead. That's not a lot, but that's something. To discuss the polls and the new map, I'm joined now by Larry Sabato, director of the University of Virginia Center for Politics. Larry, your thoughts about our map? Does it roughly square with what you've been seeing, or what?
Yes, it's very, very close to what the Crystal Ball, our website here at the University of Virginia, has had. We don't allow toss-ups, Britt. We make ourselves make a choice, which is difficult sometimes, and we actually have Arizona, which you have as a toss-up in Trump's column, and we have Ohio and North Carolina in Clinton's column. So we have Clinton up to 341 electoral votes. Could some of them switch before November? Of course. And as you mentioned, the high point for Clinton probably was the weekend after the sex talk tape was released. Then I think basically Trump reaffirmed his support among the Republican base. They returned to him. He's back well over 80% with Republicans, despite what Paul Ryan did. And if that continues, then it will enable him to keep this within a certain number of points, 5, 6, 7, something like that.
Well, as we've talked about often, Mitt Romney got 93% of the Republican vote on Election Day 4 years ago. Trump had sunk, I think, down into the low 70s over the weekend when things were really in a trough for him. It does look, as you say, as if he's recovered some. In which states do you think there may be some movement back toward him?
Well, the first place we would look once we get new polling data would be Ohio, because just a couple weeks ago we had Ohio along with Iowa, 2 key swing states leaning to Trump. Ohio's close enough so that could go back and forth quite easily. I agree with what Ed said about Florida and North Carolina. Once you look at how the Democrats are banking early votes in a year when incredibly 40% of Americans probably will be voting in advance, sometimes well in advance of November 8th. It really matters, and the Clinton campaign just has a far better ground game, get out the vote program than the Trump people do.
Yeah, it has appeared that Trump is going to rely almost entirely on the Republican National Committee, which has done its best to build a formidable get out the vote operation, but it's not at all clear that operation is devoted to early voting.
Yeah, and also Trump does have big rallies. I mean, he has an enormous number of people show up. But people who've been there have told me that sometimes they don't organize them very well to go out and canvass neighborhoods and to compensate for the fact that Trump has not invested the money in a GOTV, get out the vote program, the way the Clinton people have.
Yeah, and I had a phone conversation with Mr. Trump not too many weeks ago, in which I suggested that you do need a ground game to win a general election. And he said, "Well, I do rallies." And then he explained to me how big his rallies were, something that I kind of knew because I'd seen a lot of them, and we'd certainly seen these extraordinary photographs pictures when they show the size of the crowds. They've been huge. I guess the question is whether you use those rallies to have people on hand to sign these people up and get them to canvass, get them to do all the things that a ground game requires. And there's been some sign that they're doing that, but I guess we'll find out soon enough, won't we?
We sure will. 28 days to go, and I don't know about you, but I'm trying to count them quickly. We're all exhausted in the political community.
Yeah, this has been a long year, and in my particular case, taking over all of a sudden just a few weeks ago to do this for the balance of the election, it's been arduous. But Larry, always good to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much, Brett.
This morning, Donald Trump seemingly set aside his fight with Hillary Clinton and instead took aim at his own party. In a series of angry tweets, Trump lashed out at Republicans who have distanced themselves from their nominee. Fox's campaign Carl Cameron is in Panama City Beach, Florida, where Mr. Trump has a rally later this evening. Carl?
Hi, Brett. Well, Mr. Trump was down in Texas for a couple of closed fundraisers, and he's been very adroit at using Twitter and social media on days when he's not going to have dayside campaign events, and today was one of them. And he made a heck of a lot of noise, and he went very, very hard after the House Speaker, Paul Ryan. One of his earlier tweets today was, and I'm quoting here, "Our very weak, ineffective leader, Paul Ryan, had a bad conference call where his members went wild at his disloyalty." This was the conference call in which Paul Ryan said that he would no longer talk about, wouldn't campaign, but would maintain his endorsement for Donald Trump. We've talked to a number of people who were on that conference call, and indeed there were some people who were very angry, but particularly from battleground states, many of the members, Republicans all, on the call, were concerned that Trump's numbers appear to be eroding and it could bring down ballot candidates, and that's what the concern was. Later in the day, he said, "It's so nice," tweeting again, "It's so nice that the shackles have been taken off me and I can now fight for America the way I want to," meaning he doesn't have to accommodate any of the demands of other candidates who want him to be a little bit more politically correct as opposed to the incorrect politics that he likes to boast about doing. And finally he said, "Disloyal R's are far more difficult than crooked Hillary. They come at you from all sides. They don't know how to win. I will teach them." Well, and that's a reference, of course, to whether it's Paul Ryan, other candidates on the ballot, some of the governors who've either rescinded their endorsements or come out hard against them in the last couple of days. The Republican Party is quite fractured over this, but it's important to recognize, too, that from the very first day Trump was even just exploring the candidacy, an awful lot of establishment Republicans had differences with him as much as 2.5 years ago. Today, Donald Trump unveiled a new commercial attacking Hillary Clinton. It starts out saying that she was a failed Secretary of State and shows video from a variety of hotspots, particularly in the Mideast around the world. And then it makes a turn, and it shows video of Hillary Clinton stumbling around wobbly with her pneumonia recently, as well as her wearing the dark sunglasses that she wore when she testified before the Benghazi committee, having had a concussion back in 2013. And he says that she doesn't have the fortitude, doesn't have the stamina to be president. So, campaigning the way he wants to, he's making in a paid TV commercial Hillary's health an issue, something that he's talked about a great deal. Now he's spending money to advance that thought. Brett?
Carl, Steve Bannon, who is now officially the campaign manager, but who was not that as far as we knew last year, is saying in a story that was published this evening in the Daily Beast that he, in fact, was the campaign manager all along, that he's been that since 2015. You've been following this campaign. Did that appear to you to be the case?
Right. Well, Steve Bannon, when he was the boss of Breitbart, and really an icon of the alt-right movement and pushing hard on conservative news, was saying things to advise Donald Trump back then. Now, as the CEO of the campaign, much different. He's far more quiet. We heard a lot from him when he was working for Breitbart. He's a lot harder to reach as the CEO of the Trump campaign. It's really worth noting, Britt, that a lot of the campaign problems that Trump has experienced comes from the constantly revolving management he's had prior to Bannon and, of course, Kellyanne Conway, his campaign manager. Prior to that, one of the problems they're still dealing with is every time a senior official was dismissed, someone else would come in and be afraid to follow through on the things that the person who just got bounced were doing. So it's like if they're radioactive, maybe their work is. That has inhibited their organization. That has inhibited their messaging. Now it's been steady for a while, and Trump's much more competitive than he was when there was a sort of a revolving door of advisors and managers, and the campaign was much more undisciplined. Now that he's sort of campaigning as he wants, it's going to be free-for-all, but he does still have the same team now for the last 3 months, which is something that he didn't have for the entirety of the previous 8, 9, 11, 12 months.
Okay, Carl, thanks very much. The Clinton campaign has rolled out a blast from the past to help with millennials, apparently. Al Gore, Bill Clinton's former vice president and the 2000 Democratic presidential nominee, has hit the trail for the first time this election cycle. Fox News correspondent Jennifer Griffin is in Miami, where Al Gore and Hillary Clinton spoke earlier. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Britt. Well, it took global warming to get a warming between these two former political foes. It was absolutely surreal as they walked out onto the stage together today here in the building behind me here in Miami. Not a lot of contact between the two as they walked out. Remember, Al Gore did not endorse Hillary Clinton until recently. He didn't attend the Democratic convention. They each spoke today for exactly 23 minutes each. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign appearance, negotiated, we're told, by her campaign chairman, John Podesta, who really cares quite a bit about climate change and knows they have an enthusiasm gap among millennials.
About a decade ago, Al made a movie called An Inconvenient Truth. Now, maybe some of you have seen it, but if you haven't, I hope you'll watch it tonight. Now, it doesn't have a lot of special effects, but it does have a lot of drama. And here's the main message. Climate change is real.
Al Gore, for his part, talked about rising tides and the threat to Florida's coastline, but his real message was a reminder that a vote for a third-party candidate could lead to unintended consequences, as it did for Gore in 2000 when he lost by 537 votes. Then Green Party candidate Ralph Nader received more than 97,000.
Your vote really counts. A lot. You can consider me as an Exhibit A of that truth.
Bill Clinton, meanwhile, was campaigning far away in another part of Florida. His infidelities, Gore also in the past had blamed at the time for him not winning the 2000 election. Ironically, today is Hillary and Bill Clinton's 41st wedding anniversary. Also in evidence today, Clinton didn't stop at calling her opponent, Donald Trump, a climate change denier. She reached down ballot in an effort to shift the Senate.
It is an unacceptable response for Marco Rubio, when asked about climate change, to say, "I'm not a scientist." Well, why doesn't he ask a scientist? And maybe then he'd understand why it's so important that he, representing Florida, be committed to climate change. That's why I hope you'll elect Patrick Murphy.
Another fun fact, Britt, today the gymnasium where we were behind us here at Miami-Dade College, it was exactly the same room where Jeb Bush launched his failed presidency bid not too long ago. So a lot of history in that room today. Britt?
Yeah, wow, thanks, Jennifer. As Carl reported, Donald Trump spent his morning here to analyze all that is our nightly political panel. John McCormick, senior writer at the Weekly Standard, and Susan Ferriccio, chief congressional correspondent at the Washington Examiner. Well, Susan, the shackles are said to be off. My question is, were they ever really on?
Well, a little bit. Don't forget, for the past few weeks, he's been complimented for the most part, staying on message, delivering talking points that looked like they were at least coordinated with the GOP establishment. And it helped. You saw the gap close in the polls, and you saw him doing pretty well, more talk about maybe he could win. And inevitably there are these incidents that happen and things that get leaked and stuff from his past. Here we are again. And I think what you saw happen today really was just Trump will always, punch back twice as hard, as they say, no matter who's attacking him. This has just been characteristic of his whole campaign. It doesn't matter if it's the Democrats coming at him or the Republicans. He's going to hit back really hard. That's what he's doing by going after Paul Ryan, anyone down ballot who doesn't support him, because what matters to him is winning his movement, his 40%, not the party. It's about him and the people who follow him.
Well, from what I can see, John, this stuff thrills his core supporters, but surely he knows that he's going to need to reach beyond his core support in order to win the election. Do you think he thinks that attacking Paul Ryan and other Republicans is going to win more votes for him that he doesn't already have?
He has to know this can't help him at all. So, I mean, there are two explanations for this. One is, Susan said, it's just his personality. When he feels slighted, he's going to hit back. Two, if you look at the polls, he's on track to lose. He wants to have a rationale, an excuse for why he lost. He's going to blame congressional Republicans. What's really interesting here is that Paul Ryan didn't even unendorse Trump. This is all about him saving the House majority, because that might be the only thing stopping Hillary Clinton from getting her wish list. I mean, if Democrats get the House, if they nuke the filibuster, you're talking about single-payer Canadian-style healthcare. You're talking about unlimited taxpayer funding of abortion for any reason. That's what the Democrats really want. That seemed unthinkable a couple of weeks ago. Now they're trying to go for the kill shot. They want complete control. And Ryan is just saying, hey, I'm not endorsing. I'm letting people do what you think is best for your own district. We need to save the House to be a check on Hillary Clinton.
Do you think that it would have been better for Ryan to simply not campaign with Trump and not say much about him and not say anything about the fact that he was doing that?
That's right. You wonder what kind of coordination was going on behind the scenes. Just when he announced that there was going to be his Wisconsin appearance with Trump, he mentioned it in the bottom of a paragraph, almost like he didn't really want people to know that Trump was coming to a rally in his home state. And then immediately after that, he's uninvited. And then there's a conference call, and it's leaked out pretty readily by the staff.
Surely he must have known, though, that conference call's contents were going to leak.
Well, I'll tell you how this works, and I'll let the viewers in on it. We ask them to tell us if they can give us a background on what happens on these calls. Sometimes they let us know. Various people, in my case, I talk to people who are actually on the call to find out, and to the staff to see. Occasionally they'll tell us what happens. Sometimes they won't. They do this universally, not just for talks like this, but for other things going on during the year. So it's not just, such a conspiracy that this is in this one instance they leaked
about
it.
Capitol Hill, to leak it place in the United States.
This is how it works, okay? This is how, these things get out. But they could have said, no, we're not telling you. But that, in a way, wouldn't have worked either, because with all the members on the call, the reporters were going to find out by talking to the individual members. So it made sense for them to let us know just on background, very, very vaguely.
But did he have to say that at all, John? I mean, did he have to say that, I'm not going to campaign with him anymore, I'm not going to talk about him or whatever? Could he have just said nothing and gone about his business?
Well, I think the media would eventually notice, and I think that he did have to put out some statement at some point. And I just think that, again, the concern here for Ryan is he wants his people to do whatever they think is best to save the majority. And so I don't know if that question is analytically. I don't know, because I think that they're in a no-win situation right now. You don't want to offend the Trump supporters, but you also need to reach out to swing voters who are just disgusted by this latest tape. And the big concern is, what else is out there? What other tapes are out there that we don't even know about? If this tape dropped in early October, do we really think that the Democrats, Hillary Clinton's campaign, haven't saved even worse things for later on in the campaign?
John, Susan, don't go away. The 2016 election has left the future of the Supreme Court hanging in the balance. Shannon Bream looks at the impact this election could have on the court. And another NBC. The 44-year-old member of the Bush family was suspended from his gig on the Today Show after the Washington Post published that lewd 2005 video of Bush, who was then a host on Access Hollywood, and Donald Trump. And now several media outlets are reporting that Bush is negotiating his full exit from the show. When that tape was first released, Bush profusely apologized for his role in it. One of the most pressing issues in this 2016 election is the fate of the Supreme Court, and just leaked emails from Wikileaks may give a glimpse into Hillary Clinton's plans for that court. Fox News chief legal correspondent Shannon Bream has the story.
Among the newly released emails WikiLeaks attributes directly to the Clinton campaign is an October 2015 conversation among staffers about how the candidate planned to address guns. In the exchange, Clinton Press Secretary Brian Fallon referenced plans to brief reporters on, quote, specific proposals she would support as president. Universal background checks, of course, but also closing the gun show loophole by executive order and imposing manufacturer liability. The so-called gun show loophole, which Clinton referenced again in Sunday night's debate, is a mischaracterization by the left at best, and perhaps more accurately described as a myth. Background checks do take place at gun shows and just about everywhere else, with the rare exception for private transactions between individuals who are not firearms dealers and live in the same state. The issue of gun control is in the spotlight this election season because of an open seat on the Supreme Court, following the unexpected death of the court's staunchest defender of individual gun rights, Justice Antonin Scalia. Just days ago, with the presidential election looming, Justice Stephen Breyer publicly discussed his belief that the Second Amendment was meant for state militias.
That's what I thought they were talking about, which is not the right of an individual to keep a gun next to his bed.
Conservative court watchers expect the man tapped to fill Scalia's seat, appellate judge Merrick Garland, to back Clinton's efforts to restrict individual gun ownership should he ultimately be confirmed, prompting election ads like this one.
In 2 separate cases, Garland has demonstrated his strong hostility to gun owner rights. He even sided with the federal government on keeping personal information on anyone who purchases a gun.
And it's notable that when Clinton was asked Sunday night what she would prioritize in selecting a Supreme Court justice, she said this.
I respect the Second Amendment, but I believe there should be comprehensive background checks, and we should close the gun show loophole and close the online loophole.
The Clinton team has made clear she has her eyes set on a combination of using executive action and legislation to tighten gun controls. She's also praised programs in other countries that actually work to take back guns that are currently legally owned. Brett?
Shannon, getting back to Justice Breyer, it was a little striking to hear him say that in a television broadcast about a matter that may again come before the court. But his position on this issue is not news, is it?
No, one of the biggest cases just a few years ago dealing with D.C.'s very strict gun laws, he wrote a dissent. And so it was clear that that's how he feels about this position. But striking that he would talk about it in the days leading up to an election, and the fact that this very well could become an issue before the court again.
Shannon, thank you. And a new batch of Clinton emails shows a New York Times reporter may have given some tips to the Clinton campaign. Catherine Herridge and Tucker Carlson are both next. Stay tuned. There are 1,100 emails from Hillary Clinton's campaign chairman, John Podesta. Fox News chief intelligence correspondent Catherine Herridge spent the day digging through those mails. Hi, Catherine.
Well, thank you, Brett. Well, the emails that have just been released really simply cast a new light on some of the reporting of our colleagues here in Washington, D.C., who are following the campaign. And there's a series of exchanges with the reporter John Harwood, who you know from CNBC, also the New York Times, where he's really laudatory about Clinton's appearance and her performance in these interviews. He at one point says she had a very strong performance to her campaign chairman.
He's writing this to John Podesta in an email,
that's correct? That's right. Very strong performance. There's another email where he says her interview with NBC's Andrea Mitchell was much more comfortable and relaxed than a previous interview with CNN. And it does appear to be a crossing of the line in terms of the communications with the campaign.
And what else did you learn about relationships between journalists and the Clinton?
Well, there's another email from Donna Brazil, who wears a couple of different hats. She's now interim chair of the DNC, and she also is a commentator for CNN. And in an email to the Clinton team.
Now, what role was she in this at this point? Was she?
If my memory is correct, she would have been in the CNN commentator's role and had not yet taken on.
She didn't have an official role at the DNC
at this time. But she's very involved, as you know. She's very plugged in.
She's a long time
with the
Democratic
DNC.
Party operative for sure.
The email is entitled "Sometimes I Get the Questions." Every once in a while in
advance.
What was that in reference to? That was in reference to the body of the email, where she writes to Jen Palmieri, who's head of communications. There's a question here that I think may be a little problematic, and she goes out to list the question.
Now she's talking about the questions that are for a forthcoming town hall on CNN.
Right. That's correct.
And she's at CNN and hears about this and puts the word out about this subject.
She passes it along to the Clinton campaign. Now, if you look at the transcript from the town hall, it's not exactly verbatim, but it's very, very close. And I think at the very least you could say they tipped them off in advance to the topic and the framework that they would be facing in that town hall.
Wow. Anything else?
Well, there's also another email from 2015, a well-respected New York Times reporter. I just want to make sure I say the name correctly here. Mark Leibovich.
Yeah, who wrote a very well-received book about Washington. Was very tough on the institutions and to some extent the media.
That's correct. Well, let's pull up just one of the quotes here because you can see for yourself. He's pushing out some quotes to the Clinton campaign, allowing them to veto what will be used. And it says, I wanted the option to use all, that's a reference to the quotes, and you could veto what you didn't want. That's why I selected the 5 or 6 that I sent to you. I mean, as you know from your decades of experience, it's unheard of to give the subject of your story veto over what the quotes are. It's just not done.
That is unusual. I suspect that you sometimes you check a story with someone you've written about.
You might check the language, but not a veto.
Not a veto over quotes.
Correct.
That's a little unusual. Catherine, thank you very much. So, what to make of this seeming chumminess between the Clinton campaign and certain members of the press corps? Joining me is Tucker Carlson, co-host of Fox News Weekend. Tucker, you've had a chance to look at these things. What do you make of them?
Well, they're shocking. I would say a couple of things. So I sent a bunch of reporters out today to get comment from the various news organizations involved in this.
Oh, tell us
in the
about
majority
what you got.
of cases, we got a no comment. Now think about that. What would be the justification for a news organization whose whole mission is predicated on the idea of openness, of an open flow of information, of honesty, to say no comment? We're just not going to respond. We don't have to and we're not going to. That was their response. And the reason they're not responding, I think, is because this is, let's call it plainly, this is corruption. This is collusion between the principals and the people who are supposed to be watching over them, the watchdogs, the press, and doing so on our behalf, that is, readers and viewers. We imagine, we the consumers out there in the rest of the world, that they are working on our behalf to get answers on our behalf from people in whom we vested power and money, government. And yet we're now finding that they are, in fact, colluding. In some cases, as with John Harwood, he was giving campaign advice to the chairman of Hillary Clinton's campaign, John Podesta, who's saying, that Ben Carson, you should watch out for him. In another case,
there was a warning, wasn't there?
That's exactly right.
Warned them about Ben Carson being a potentially strong candidate.
Yes. In another case, he basically expressed revulsion at Donald Trump and said, in effect, I'm glad that I was so tough on him in the debate. Now, he was one of the moderators of one of the Republican debates, and as you'll recall, it was controversial because he seemed to be singling out Trump for tough and what some people said was unfair treatment. And his response was, look, I'm a reporter. I'm asking tough questions, which is, of course, what we're supposed to be doing. It turns out here he is gloating with the chairman of the campaign of Trump's opponent, saying, I'm glad I treated him that way. Really? Look, journalism is predicated on trust, just as the financial markets are predicated on trust. All of us participate in it believing it's on the level. It's straight. Insider trading undermines the financial markets. That's why it's illegal. This undermines the public's trust in journalism. It hurts all of us, and it makes our society more unstable. If you can't believe what you see on the news or read in a paper, you'll believe anything.
It's not unusual in my experience, Tucker, for journalists to develop friendly relationships with the people we cover, or particularly with the aides to people we cover. You see them all the time. You've known them for many years. You may tell jokes with them. You may have a beer with them.
Yes.
But I don't think it's common to write little reviews of a candidate's performance and send the review by email or whatever to the candidate's manager. I think that's a little unusual.
And you're absolutely right. I ran into Mike McCurry 2 nights ago, who was Bill Clinton's press secretary, who I like a great deal. I like him a lot. I was happy to see him. So you may be friendly with people. What you don't do is identify with them. You don't feel like you're on the same side. You're on the opposite side. You're in a contentious relationship by its definition.
Right.
They're the politicians or their aides. You're the press. It's Wile E. Coyote versus the Roadrunner.
Yeah.
And it has to be.
It's arm's length at least.
It has to be. And the problem is they're all in the same soup culturally. It turns out that your average New York Times reporter has a lot more in common with your average presidential candidate than he has with your average voter. That's a huge problem.
I remember I would be sitting up in the Senate gallery and you'd see these ferocious debates happen on the Senate floor in the days when I was covering Congress. And then sometimes you'd see the two members that have just been at each other's throats walking out of the chamber with their arms around each other. And I thought that was, in a way, kind of a nice thing that they got along personally. But I remember I said to one reporter one time I was talking to him, but he said, look at them. I said, look, no matter what you think, those guys down there, men and women down on that floor, they're a lot closer to each other than they are to any of us.
They're on the same side.
That used to be true.
And in some sense it's true in that they have a shared interest. But the backdrop of all of this is the press keeps them honest. We're here on behalf of our readers and viewers. And if we forget that and we start to believe that really we're on the same side of the people we cover, and not just politicians, but heads of large companies or Hollywood or anybody with power, we should be a backstop against their overreach.
Do you think this is a consequence of a bias that we've all recognized that occurs with these journalists toward the party they favor, whose ideas they favor, and that they don't really recognize that they have the bias, and they cause them to slide into these peculiar relationships?
I think that's part of it. I mean, journalists are liberal overwhelmingly, but they always have been, and it hasn't always been this way. I think it's a cultural affinity is the problem. I think everyone in the political class is from the same background as everyone in the press. They went to the same schools, they have the same cultural assumptions. They're basically the same people who just took different paths. It used to be the press was comprised primarily of working class people. It was a trade. And so they didn't actually have that much in common with the people running the country. And that was good. Maybe we should get back to that.
That's what people complain about the elites in the press corps. Tucker, thanks very much.
Thank you, Brett.
Republicans hope to keep control of both the House and Senate, of course, but several Senate races are now clearly up for grabs. It might not have been only a few days ago. We'll dive into those races coming up. Plus, what would the late, great William F. Buckley think of the wild 2016 election? James Rosen has written a new book concerning Buckley, and he's here next. Stay with us. There's a certain kind of talented person whose range of gifts and skills evokes feelings of both awe and envy. Such a person is my Fox News colleague James Rosen, who can draw, who can do impressions, and yes, write superbly well. His latest book is called A Torch Kept Lit, Great Lives of the 20th Century. It is a collection of writings by William F. Buckley himself, a man of many gifts, much like James himself, who's here. James, nice to see you.
Britt, thank you so much.
So this book is a collection. What exactly is the nature of its contents?
A Torch Kept Lit collects 50 of Bill Buckley's best eulogies that he either delivered at memorial services or published for the towering figures of his time. There's a section on presidents of the United States. There's a section on people from the community of arts and letters. I like to say A Torch Kept Lit is the only place where you're going to find Milton Friedman next to Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead.
Now, just to pause for a moment, William F. Buckley, whose face you see on the screen there, is the founder of National Review magazine and the father, really, of the modern conservative movement as we have known it, starting in about 1960, as it evolved through the Reagan years up until this year. And and if anyone doubts the range of William F. Buckley's interests, consider that among those, as you mentioned, Milton Friedman, the great economist, many presidents, Buckley was also an Elvis fan. Buckley, who, by the way, once said that the greatest genius who ever lived was Johann Sebastian Bach. Right. He also was an Elvis fan, and he said something striking. He had a profile of Elvis written many years after Elvis's death. I'd like you to read it in Buckley's voice.
Well, I'll be honored to do it. Bill Buckley was an Elvis man. He actually wrote a novel about Elvis, and he wrote at Graceland, quote, "There are the gold records he won from the industry, authentic memorabilia of a voice and manner and style that dumbfounded, enthralled, and repelled the largest single musical audience ever got together by a single musical artist." Not bad. He told me himself that's pretty good.
He did?
Yes. In 2000. I cherish that.
I bet you do. Now, talk to me a little bit about some of the other things in this book that people should look for, because it's full of stuff.
A Torch Kept Lit has Buckley summing up the lives of the great figures of the 20th century, people he often knew personally or corresponded with. People like Princess Di and Winston Churchill and Ronald Reagan and MLK and John Lennon and Johnny Carson. In fact, on Johnny Carson, that's one of the eulogies we have in the book, and I'll give a little taste of that in Buckley's voice if I'm allowed. He once confided to a critic that I was the only guest he had ever been frightened of. I don't know what the circumstances of that odd situation were, and the critic didn't pause to ask, and Johnny didn't elaborate, as far as I know. But he was a frequent guest on The Tonight Show, and Buckley, for all of his intellectualism and wit and erudition, could easily coexist alongside people like Rich Little, the impersonator on The Tonight Show.
Well, and speaking of impersonators, you do him pretty well. Anyone else from the volume you'd like to give us a sample of in Buckley's voice?
Buckley wrote an entire book about his friendship with Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan said that reading National Review made him into a conservative from a liberal, and he called Buckley the most influential journalist and intellectual of our times. In his eulogy for Ronald Reagan, which was actually written before Reagan had died, but when he was in decline, Buckley wrote, "I have speculated on what I continue to believe was the conclusive factor in the matter of American security against any threat of Soviet aggression. It was the character of the occupant of the White House, the character of Ronald Reagan."
Now, just so people will have an idea of just how close you come to Buckley. We have a little Buckley. Let's listen to it.
We will explore the question of the future of the GOP and of the conservative movement. There is as little point, I think, in reciting the background of Ronald Reagan as there would be in reciting the background of Jimmy Carter. I suppose it is reasonable to say that they are the two best-known politicians in the country after Senator Kennedy and Richard Nixon.
Listen, you stop calling me a crypto-Nazi.
Let's stop calling names.
You in the goddamn face, and you'll stay plastered.
Gentlemen.
Senator Goldwater is both a Republican and a conservative, terms which he has not found, or at least not yet found, to be mutually exclusive.
God, I love that. Thank you, Britt.
Well, you sound just like him. I mean, you really do. You do a great job. But the book, ladies and gentlemen, is good stuff. The pieces are short enough that you can read 2 or 3 of them at one sitting. The writing of James's introduction to each of these is terrific stuff. Great book to give away for Christmas. Great book all the way around. I'm proud to own it. James, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you, Britt.
Tight Senate races around the country could change the balance of the Senate. Right now, Republicans have control, but in this election, anything might happen, and we're going to talk about that next. Stay tuned. The outcome of the 2016 presidential race will almost certainly filter down into the races that will determine control of the Senate and the House. Speaker of the House Porramen will no longer campaign for Donald Trump and has told Republicans running this year to do what is best for them in their districts. Some Republicans are fighting a winning battle, but others face tough election fights, as we've been noticing. Our nightly political panel is back. John McCormick, senior writer at the Weekly Standard, and Susan Ferricchio, chief congressional correspondent of the Washington Examiner. Well, the Democrats need to pick up, what, a net of how many seats?
Right now, Republicans have 54, so it depends on, whether there be a tie-break up of 4 or 5, depending on...
So a net of 4 or 5, which means that if, a handful of Republicans lose, it only takes a few, and there are 24 Republicans up, correct?
Right.
Only 10 Democrats. So there's real opportunity here for the Democrats.
Well,
races.
because for Democrats, there's only one race that's really endangered. It's an open seat in Nevada, and Harry Reid is retiring. He's the minority leader. For Republicans, it's really much more risky. You've got more than a half dozen seats that are either toss-up or really endangered.
Yeah, Republicans in blue states, right?
Well, yeah, or in purplish states, right. So they are endangered in far greater numbers than Democrats. So the idea is that it's likely Democrats will pick up some seats. The question is how many. Will it be enough to turn it into either a tied Senate, where the tiebreaker would go to the White House in that instance, or whether it'll be a Democratic majority or a very slim Republican majority. These are all possibilities.
What strikes you as a likely outcome, and which seats do you think are most vulnerable for the Republicans, John?
Well, definitely, if you look at the polls, it's got to be these blue state races. Illinois is a really tough state, even in a midterm year. Now it's a presidential year. It's going to be very tough for Mark Kirk to hold on to that seat. Mark Kirk is the incumbent Republican right now.
Yeah, he bailed out on Trump early on, right?
Very early on, trying to get separation. So in Wisconsin, it's really interesting. I mean, most polls have consistently shown Ron Johnson down. Now, out of the blue this week, we get a poll showing Ron Johnson up 5, another poll showing him down 12. So really not clear based on the polling right now. Yeah. Russ Feingold, he's a former senator.
And he's the guy that Johnson beat, right?
He's a guy that Johnson beat.
So this is a rematch.
So well-known quantities. So that's why I'm so surprised.
And the average now shows Russ Feingold, the once incumbent, now challenger, as you can see on the screen there, folks, leading by about 2.5, 3.5 points, right?
Yes, and if it weren't for that recent poll out of the blue showing Johnson up 5, it would be much worse. So we need to see, is there real movement going on in this race, or is this just an outlier? That's the big question in Wisconsin.
Where else, Susan?
Well, Kelly Ayotte in New Hampshire is very interesting. She's running against Maggie Hassan, who's the New Hampshire governor.
Yeah,
popular governor, yes. They're both popular. And, of course, it's a state where, Donald Trump won the Republican primary, and you just had Kelly Ayotte walk back her endorsement of Trump, despite the fact that he does have a lot of followers in the state. She said she had to do so because of her daughter, and she made that decision.
Now, Ayotte is up 2 in the Real Clear Politics average, but that's not a lot. And what are there recent individual polls that paint a different picture?
Well, and part of the issue too is that the down ticket question here. If Clinton wins New Hampshire, on the earlier map that we were looking at,
Right.
you had the state leaning
Looks like she's
toward
doing
it.
well there, yeah.
And the same in Florida, where you have Rubio running, leading by a few points. Now, here's where you can have what they call the split ticket, where you have people voting for Clinton as the president. You might have them retaining the Republican incumbent in the Senate.
Yeah, he's up.
That's
Rubio's
possible.
up about 4.5 points in the average. Does
He is,
that
but,
sound right to you?
yes, and that's still in the danger zone.
Right.
4.5 points.
What's really
John,
interesting-
last word.
What's really interesting in Florida is actually, you've seen the breakdown, is that Donald Trump is losing Hispanic voters by maybe 20 points or more. Marco Rubio in some recent polling is winning Hispanic voters by 10 points. So I think if that dynamic continues, he should be in pretty good shape. On the other hand, his challenger has low name ID. As it creeps up, it might become an even closer race.
John, Susan, thank you very much. Coming up, here's something I really never quite expected. We have mean tweets about mean tweets. I'll read some of them next. Stay with us. Round of viewer feedback from the Twitterverse. First up is Dr. Reasoner, who tweeted, quote, "I think you look younger than anyone has a right to, and it's not often you get to see a journalist who actually knew Walter Cronkite." And it wasn't just Cronkite, as Joseph Howard tweeted, "Brett, don't let the haters get to you. You've outlasted your peers like Huntley and Brinkley, and they were your interns." But Leanne Uribe tweeted, "You look incredible. We had no idea of your age. My 8-year-old said you look around 50. It's true. Keep doing what you're doing." Thanks for that, Leanne, but it seems not all viewers like this segment.